This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Yo, what's going on, everyone? It is Monday. Actually, it's technically Sunday as I'm currently recording this, but it'll be going up on Monday. And as you can tell by the title of today's show, got a pretty big retro discussion to get into. We are going to be reviewing WWF WrestleMania 12 as part of our retro deep dive on WWF's video library. And man, it is crazy to think that we started this review series midway through 93, and now we're almost coming up on the midway mark of 96. It's been a struggle to get through a lot of the content, but the running gag is that we survived the year of 1995. And historically, it was hard to get much worse than WWF in 95. Although some of the stuff in the Attitude Era gave it a run for its money. Anyhow, if you are checking out the show for the very first time, welcome to the Five Starr Wrestling Report. We are the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. Here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays to bring you a collection of classic wrestling talk. Still got some prepping to do for the Friday show, and given that weekends are now my only time to really sit down and watch the shows, I still have Mid-South and World Class to watch today at some point. But that'll all be for Friday. Right now I'm going to dive into the pay-per-view recap, and then we'll touch on the Retro Raw from the following night. And the time has come to take a look at one of the more critically acclaimed WrestleManias of all time. Definitely not one that ranks among the all-time great manias. I think that's a bit of a stretch. But it's certainly nowhere close to a WrestleMania 9 or a WrestleMania 11 in terms of just being a miserable experience to sit through. I don't know if I would say I liked it more than WrestleMania 10, but it still had its moments. You know, we talked so much in the build-up to the show that 1996 was still generally not a good year for the WWF. Wasn't as bad as 93 and 94. Certainly wasn't appalling as 95 from a TV and business standpoint. The big albatross for the WWF in 96 was the obvious growing popularity of WCW. By May of this year, they're going to be laying the foundation for the NWO. I mean, they already had pretty much all the big-name players from previous eras under contract. Hogan, Savage, Sting, Flair, Luger. Pretty soon they would have Hall and Nash. The rise of Goldberg in 97 became a huge deal at the time. And it really wasn't until late 97, post-Montreal, where Vince finally started making a lot of critical adjustments to get the WWF out of their slump. And a lot of that really began by him breaking away from the cartoon gimmicks and hokey presentation. You know, the stuff that just weighed the company down for years. And we still saw plenty of that in 96. So with that all in mind, we're going into WrestleMania 12. We know the whole backstory of what they're pushing as the main selling point for the pay-per-view. It's Shawn Michaels fulfilling the Boyhood Dream and capturing the WWF Championship. You go all the way back to the previous year when Shawn failed to beat Diesel at WrestleMania 11 to win the title. Following night on Raw, they effectively turned him babyface when his then bodyguard, Sid Vicious, turned on him and powerbombed him in the middle of the ring. He goes on to win the Intercontinental Championship and has that classic second ladder match with Razor at SummerSlam where he gets his win back from the first ladder match they aired at WrestleMania 10 in the Garden. We've obviously had fun making a mockery of the whole bullshit Syracuse story where the company tried to kayfabe Shawn getting legitimately beaten up by a Marine vet in the parking lot. Even Bret Hart was openly joking about that on television because he knew what the real story was. There was the whole concussion angle they did on Raw to try to drum up more sympathy on him. And then you fast forward to the Rumble in January. Shawn wins for the second year in a row. It's supposed to be this emotional, heartfelt moment where everyone's supposed to relish in it and pretend that Shawn is somehow this sympathetic, white meat, lovable babyface when nothing can be further from the truth. But this is the guy Vince wanted to run with for the foreseeable future. And as we found out very soon, it would end up becoming a company-wide disaster. I still maintain what I said on the Go Home review last week. Knowing that Vince was going to go through with the decision to put the title on Shawn, they were doing all the Raw tapings in San Antonio for the last month. Why the hell didn't they just host WrestleMania 12 from San Antonio that year? I'll never know. Instead, the event was held in the Arrowhead Pond from Anaheim, California, which I don't really understand. I don't really find anything remotely appealing about Anaheim, mostly because I don't really find anything appealing about California, period. But that's where the event was held. The show drew 18,853 people. I think by today's standards, that would be considered a bad attendance figure for Raw. But that also kind of reflects on just how dour things were with the WWF around this time. 1995 drove a lot of people away. People really don't remember just how bad shit was. I forgot how bad shit was. It wasn't until we reviewed all those Raws and pay-per-views last year where I was like, Christ, this product sucked. I will say, though, the one constant I'm always glad to see when I go back and look at some of these classic WWF pay-per-views, a substandard or even bad WrestleMania under 3 hours, it is still much more tolerable than a boring, mediocre WrestleMania that goes 6+ hours. Stretch over 2 nights. Mania 41 is going to be a rough weekend. But let's go ahead and get into the card. It has been a hot minute since I've seen this whole pay-per-view start to finish. Approximately 29 years, as a matter of fact. When I was a wee little lad. And we open with the 6-man tag of Camp Cornette facing the team of Yokozuna, Ahmed Johnson, and Jake the Snake Roberts. And Cornette's team consisted of Owen Hart, Davey Boy, and Vader. And remember the stipulation they set up on Raw a couple weeks ago? Should Cornette's team lose, he would have to spend 5 minutes in the ring with all the babyfaces. Part of me was sadistically amused by the idea of what Ahmed Johnson working with Jim Cornette would have looked like. It's probably what prompted Cornette to put the kibosh on this and say, my team's going over because I'm not letting that potato head Ahmed put his hands on me. And let me just say from the onset, because if you follow the Raw reviews, I mentioned how I really had no recollection of how this match went for the time. I vaguely remember the heels going over, but that's about it. And I had to give him credit. As skeptical as I was about some of the parties involved here, mainly Jake Roberts and Ahmed Johnson, this was not a bad match at all. In fact, it was reasonably good. For me, it was easily the second best match on the card outside the main event. I mean, what more can I say, man? Jim Cornette knows how to produce and age in a match. He finds the best ways to accentuate guys' strengths and does everything to hide their weaknesses. And the biggest weakness by far in this entire match was Ahmed. So what did they do? They kept him on the apron for 90% of the thing. And it made the match a million times better. But this kind of reminded me of one of those old school NWA multi-mans we would see from house shows back in the day. Like, picture a 6-man tag with Dusty and the Road Warriors going up against Flair, Tully, and Arn. I mean, you get the hot jump start with everyone before the bell. You slow things down in the middle with letting the heels work over the baby faces, having them constantly tag in and out to keep things fresh. Jake was probably in there the most out of anybody on the babyface side. And hey, you know what? He did all right. I mean, let's be frank, Owen was basically a one-man working crew for the majority of it. Not to take anything away from Davey Boy or Vader, but, you know, Vader was still relatively fresh off the shoulder surgery. He really hadn't got a whole lot of time to work since he came back. And Davey was never considered a technical savant like Owen or Bret was. But they had about as good a 6-man as they could possibly have, given some of the talent involved. Crowd really came out for the closing several minutes after Roberts tagged in Yokozuna and the babyfaces started firing back. You had the big schmoz at the end so they could set up the spot where Roberts was going to tease giving Cornette the DDT. But then Vader cut him off and came off the top of the Vader bomb to get the pinfall. You know, like I said, had a lot of old school 1986 to 1988 NWA flavor to it. It was a fun opening chaotic brawl that never really got out of hand or ridiculous. Not like the other chaotic, ridiculous brawl that I'm about to talk about with Piper and Goldust in a minute. And yeah, the fans got fucked out of their 5 minutes of seeing Corny get beat up by the babyfaces. But you know, when all was said and done, I think the heels kind of needed to go over here more than the babyfaces, especially for what they're about to set up later in the year with Vader going for the WWF Championship. I mean, he really needed to be the central spotlight in all this. And remember, the original match was supposed to be Yokozuna versus Vader in a singles match, but then they changed it to a 6-man, probably because Vader was still not at 100% at the time. Plus, Yoko was nearly incapable of working long singles matches by this point. I mean, that would have just been a disaster. So, given the nature of how they had to change it up last minute, I would give it a thumbs up. Definitely exceeded my expectations. And that brought us to the Hollywood Backlot Brawl between Goldust and Roddy Piper, Part 1. Or as Vince actually said here in the intros, Hollywood Backlot Brawl. He was probably still thinking about Marlena's tits when they were showing her sitting in the dressing room watching on the monitor. Slip of the tongue. All right. When it comes to a match like this, first off, you have to loosely use the term match. A lot of your perspective on this comes down to personal preference. Now, I'm someone that's been very vocal about the build to this match on television. They had that one segment together on Raw a few weeks ago where Goldust spent like 5 minutes fondling Roddy Piper's junk while Piper just stood there and let it happen. Then he finally slapped Goldust in the face and told him that he'll be at WrestleMania to kick his ass on the back lot. Then he had all the pre-tapes with Goldust on the old Piper's Pit segment, cutting weird, creepy promos. Whatever in the hell that segment was last week where he was in the back lot groping a mannequin dressed like Piper. Like, that shit was just awful. I've seen the actual fight here so many times over the years. If you remove all the goofy segments on Raw and just try to view the whole thing in a vacuum, there were shades of the old Tupelo concession stand brawl in Memphis from back in '79. You know, everything they did here in the parking lot in terms of the brawling looked fairly convincing. Like they were actually trying to hurt one another and kill each other. Other than Piper getting visibly blown up less than 3 minutes in, the fighting aspect of it was pretty good. But again, it's the WWF, so there's all the hokey window dressing with everything that goes along with the setup. Like Goldust riding in with a completely gold-painted Cadillac, and you got the various cameramen positioned in certain spots to make sure they perfectly capture everything in real time. I mean, you can see the audio equipment guys off in the distance, too. You got all the assorted gimmicks that are almost flawlessly placed so they can slam each other into stuff later on. It's... Again, it's a WWF street fight environment with all the usual WWF bells and whistles you'd come to expect. It was very overproduced. And it only gets more ridiculous when you get to the second half of the fight later in the show. Because that was the whole deal with the backlot brawl. You know, the fact that they taped portions of it to sporadically air throughout the pay-per-view. But in terms of the actual fight here in the backlot, you know, the immediate thing that jumps out to everybody is the fucking Ford Bronco that's parked to the side. And if you know anything about the O.J. Simpson Bronco chase from June of '94, I mean, you knew exactly where this was going once Goldust showed up in the gold Cadillac. But they had what you could best describe as a professional-looking warped street fight. You know, Piper went after Goldust immediately with a baseball bat, smashing the windows of the Cadillac and basically beating the holy fuck out of Goldust for the first several minutes here. I mean, most of this was Goldust trying to play chicken and get the hell out of Dodge. He threw Goldust into a table with a bunch of food and drinks, slammed him into dumpsters, slammed him into the hood of the Cadillac several times. I mean, Goldust was bleeding all over the place. And the whole thing led to the climax where Goldust was finally able to break free from Piper long enough to get inside the Cadillac and take off out of the parking lot. And then Piper pursued from behind in the Ford Bronco. And that all led to the pre-tape during the next match where they actually used the helicopter footage of the actual O.J. Bronco chase to give off the impression that Goldust was legitimately being chased by Piper on the interstate. Just fucking absurd. Everything about it. I mean, I like the one point. I forget when Vince mentioned it, but there's a point where they're showing the car chase footage, and you hear Vince go, you know, this scene looks oddly familiar somehow. Yeah, you don't say, Vince. Could you get any more tongue-in-cheek? So, in the middle of that rigmarole, WWF's future top star of the Attitude Era is working a middle card match with Savio fucking Vega that nobody cares about. And based on the way the commentary went for this match, I don't think Vince and Lawler really gave two shits about it either. And they were busier trying to talk with Roddy Piper on the phone line while he was pursuing Goldust on the freeway. By the way, How in the hell did Piper connect his phone device to the Arrowhead Pond while he was in the middle of a car chase? Phone service wasn't that great back in the 90s. So yeah, Steve Austin and Savio Vega. It's fine for a Raw TV main event, but nothing that belonged on a WrestleMania card. I get they wanted to have Stone Cold in a featured match, give him a big WrestleMania win. But this wasn't even a good showcase spot for Austin. Crowd's not really into it. You know, again, they're still more focused on the Goldust Piper stuff than what's happening in the ring. They end up doing the spot where Savio's making his comeback, and he goes for a spin heel kick but accidentally bumps Tim White. And while he's down, Austin ends up clobbering Savio with the $1 million belt a couple times. Then he puts him in a chin lock for about 2 minutes while Ted's on the floor trying to revive the official. I don't know what the hell that red liquid was he dumped all over his face, but it woke Tim White up in a hurry. Then he crawled over and dropped Savio's arm 3 times and declared Austin the winner. Again, it was okay. I mean, this feud only really came together on television in the last couple weeks because these guys wrestled a no contest on Raw. Or was it a double count out? I don't even remember. It was never much of a feud to begin with. You know, it's so weird to think that we're basically still on autopilot mode with Austin until King of the Ring season. Which again, remember, Austin was not originally supposed to win King of the Ring in 96. They were saving that spot for Hunter until the curtain call incident in late May. And boy, they did a real solid job preparing Hunter for that supposed crowning achievement. If you were to ask me at the time, who was slated to win King of the Ring this year? Hunter or Austin? Based on the booking here at Mania, I'd have probably told you Austin. Apparently Vince was thinking Hunter. Goes to show how out of touch we all were at the time. Nah, here's what they had slated for Hunter to do at WrestleMania 12. Going out there to do the job for a returning Ultimate Warrior in T-minus 90 seconds. Wherein the Warrior no-sold Hunter's pedigree finish, popped back up to his feet, hit Hunter with 3 clotheslines, a shoulder tackle, a press slam, and a Warrior splash for the 3. This, you know, as a fan, I'm always hesitant to use the term burial because the term is so often misused. Things that people perceive as burials in wrestling when they're not actually burials. I don't care what anyone says. This was a fucking burial. They did Hunter dirty here, brother. They gave him the Austin Theory treatment on this card. Maybe that's Triple H's mentality when it comes to doing everything he can to possibly kill off Austin Theory's stock as a talent. He's still probably bitter about doing the job to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 12 in under 2 minutes. And he's trying to show Austin Theory what it's like to be in the doghouse. I don't know, dude. This is always one of those booking calls that continues to baffle me all these years after seeing it. I mean, you're trying to put the Warrior over strong with his return. That's one thing. But whether I like it or not, and trust me, I say this as somebody who never grew up a Triple H fan, he was a guy they were pushing on Raw over the last how many months? The guy basically went undefeated for the first 6 or so months of his career. He rarely ever did a job, especially when it came to being pinned or submitted. I always wondered why they used Hunter in this spot. It's just so bizarre. It's not like these guys ever feuded afterwards. This was literally a one and done so they could immediately branch off and have Hunter start feuding with Mark Marrow. Oh, the former Johnny B. Bad. Good Christ. I'll save my thoughts for Mark Marrow for the Raw report. But yeah, that was Hunter's contribution to WrestleMania. His very first. Welcome to the big leagues, kid. You're doing the job to Warrior in 2 minutes. And speaking of guys doing jobs and me still trying to figure out why it made any rational sense from a booking standpoint, that brings us to Taker and Diesel. By the way, can I just say this right now while it's on my mind? Just to give you all perspective on why modern WWE is fucking atrocious and borderline unwatchable for me in 2025. At the time Diesel began to make his entrance for this match, we were already at the semi-main event. And we were still only at the 52 mark of overall runtime for the pay-per-view. And I know they still had the Ironman match left. But I'm just trying to think. 52 minutes into WrestleMania 41. I mean, we'd basically be getting ready to head into the second match on the card, right? With all the entrance music milking and the fucking pyro and the singing and the chanting and the theatrics. Even on a 4-match card, we'd only be a quarter of the way through the goddamn show as of this point. Just among the many reasons why I don't invest in much of WWE anymore. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. Let's talk about this Undertaker-Diesel match, because this feud was always a tough sell for me. As big a Taker fan as I am, I never really thought him and Diesel was a good match on paper. The booking of Diesel in the last 6 months has been so erratic. First he turns heel on Bret after he loses the WWF title at Survivor Series. You know, then he comes out on television the following night and talks about how he's not a bad guy or a good guy. Then he starts high-fiving the fans despite him still being a pompous prick. I mean, there's been so much gray area with him. And they only really started running with him as a heel when he started fucking over Taker in his title matches with Bret. And you kind of look at everything as they're gearing up for this feud for Mania. Taker's what? 5-0, 6-0 at WrestleMania as of this point. I mean, clearly Vince had to see that he had something special with the undefeated streak, even if they're not fully recognizing it yet. So it makes all the sense in the world that The Undertaker would go over here. Yet, what is the title feud they're setting up coming out of WrestleMania? Not Shawn versus Taker, but Shawn versus Diesel, which they had already set up on television when Diesel attacked Shawn and MSG and laid him out with a chair during that house show. So, I mean, it does kind of call into question the decision to have Diesel lose clean to The Undertaker here. I mean, I hated Kevin Nash back in the day, but logically, based on the booking of this match, wouldn't Taker technically be in line for a title shot ahead of Diesel? And then there's the actual match itself, which... well, it's not my favorite Undertaker WrestleMania match. I'll say that much. For a big guy match, it's not abhorrently bad. The problem is Taker had to work with Kevin Nash, who's about as fun to watch as milk curdling. The heat portion to this match nearly put me to sleep. You got Nash out there beating on Taker for like 10 minutes straight. The only notable thing about it is the jag-off in the crowd that keeps sounding off the air horn every 3 minutes. Probably to make up for the fact that everyone was sitting on their hands. I had all but zoned out until they did the deal where Nash gave Taker the jackknife power bombs. And he would do the thing where he would stall for a minute before trying to pin Taker with one foot on the chest. Then eventually he went down to pin Taker by hooking the leg. But then Taker goozled him and teased a choke slam. They did some more back and forth until Taker finally gave Nash the choke slam and hit the tombstone and got the pin. That's really the only thing to note about the finish. This was a pure Kevin Nash going through the motions match. And I don't know how soon he had already made up his mind that he was going to leave for WCW. I'm pretty sure him being told he wasn't going over here helped to facilitate that decision. Not saying I would have endorsed Diesel beating The Undertaker. But if he was going to immediately go right into title contention after the fact, I don't know. The whole thing doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. By this point, I'm sure Razor had already been in his ear about wanting to leave. I know there's a point where Nash had gone to talk to Vince about re-signing. And I can't remember how the whole story went, but I think it was something to the effect of Nash wanted to stay, but he also wanted Vince to pay him some kind of low seven-figure salary. I think Bischoff had already reached out to negotiate with Nash by that point and tried to offer a seven-figure deal. And then Nash wanted Vince to match it. But of course, Vince couldn't afford it, and I don't think he really saw Kevin Nash as a seven-figure kind of guy. And once Nash knew that Vince couldn't match the offer, that was pretty much it. He did the in-your-house match with Shawn in April. They did the house show match in MSG the following month. They had their little clique group hug and exposed the business. And that was basically it for Kevin Nash in the WWE until, early 2000s? I think it was shortly after the Invasion debacle when he came in, right? Because he was still under the guaranteed contract with the Turner Network at the time once WWF bought out WCW. By the way, all of this is highly more intriguing than the actual match. If you're somebody that's waiting for a detailed breakdown of the Undertaker-Diesel WrestleMania encounter, you should probably go seek out another channel. It was about as memorable as the last time I went to take a dump. One of the most boring WrestleMania matches of all time. And again, I say that as a die-hard Taker fan. This is a horrible WrestleMania showcase for him. And fuck Kevin Nash for being a lazy, complacent prick. So meanwhile, back at the ranch, actually it's more like back on the freeway, the high-speed car chase between Roddy Piper and Goldust continues. I guess they somehow managed to evade the cops along the way. They also managed to do a convenient full circle around the city and make their way back to the arena. Funny how that works. And the camera crew was right there to pick up the footage. How convenient. Actually, you know what the funniest part about this whole thing is? It's not even the idea that Goldust and Piper managed to escape being arrested for what we're led to believe was a legit high-speed car chase. It's the fact that When they finally arrive back at the arena, and you actually get a clear visual of Piper's Bronco after he pulls up next to the Cadillac, you can clearly see the blood marks on the driver's side of the door from where Piper had thrown Goldust into it earlier. I just imagine what someone would have thought as they see this fucking madman going 80 miles an hour down the highway in a white Ford Bronco with fucking blood splotches on the side of the car. Literally post O.J. Simpson. Probably thinking, oh boy, he's back at it again. There's so much about this match that baffles me when I go back and watch it years later. Things that I never could have possibly processed as a child that are now totally apparent. This was very questionable timing by the WWF. Meanwhile, there's Diesel just nonchalantly walking through the back, totally no-selling the match he just previously had with Taker, where he got dropped on his head with a tombstone pile driver. He's just walking to the locker room. And so, naturally, as you would expect following a hostile car chase on the freeway in Anaheim, the fight between these two would wind up being settled not on the freeway, but back in the arena, inside the confounds of a wrestling ring, wherein both men were working to mutilate the other's genitalia. In the case of Goldust trying to make out with Piper. And it all culminated when Goldust went a bridge too far. Metaphorically, not the bridges they may have passed on the interstate. And this is a direct quote from Vince. I shit you not. The moment Goldust planted one on Piper's lips, that is when Vince said, Goldust may have taken it one step too far. Oh, of course. Right, yeah, that makes total sense. Not Piper attempting to run down Goldust and innocent people on a public interstate. That was perfectly okay. Piper was justified in that case. But the minute Goldust tried to smooch on Piper's face and jam his fucking tongue down his gullet, though that's crossing the line. So this is about the point where I gave up trying to make sense of everything going on. It's not even like I could make a joke about them fighting back to the ring to start doing wrestling holds, because, I mean, they didn't even do that. The whole thing was Goldust throwing shitty warped punches on Piper. Piper no-sold pretty much all of it. And finally, when Goldust managed to kiss Piper on the lips, Piper immediately got angry, and he started retaliating by going after Goldust's gonads. And the whole thing ends with him stripping Goldust down to his lingerie. Not making that up. Go watch the tape. Goldust legitimately had on women's lingerie for this occasion. And then after he got stripped down, he and Marlena just ran to the back. So, technically the match ended via no contest, despite that they still played Piper's music. Literally, all of that, just so we could have no clear-cut decisive winner. So yeah. That was the Backlot Brawl segment of the WrestleMania card. It's a lot dumber than I remember it being, that's for sure. Let's just call this one an acquired taste. If you're a fan of hokey, bad WWF comedy with stars that are over like crazy, oh, this is the match for you. For me, it was very silly and not the kind of thing I'm into. I wouldn't say it's the worst thing I've seen Goldust involved with, unfortunately. It might not even be the worst thing I've seen Piper involved with. I think that would have to go to that horrendous Nitro segment when he started shooting on a bunch of jobbers for no discernible reason. God, that segment died a death on TV Live. I don't even remember what the build-up to it was. I just remember the actual segment. I mean, this was just 5 minutes of bad follow-up from a brawl that already began in the parking lot like an hour beforehand. But people love this match for some reason. I don't know why. Luckily, the Ironman match didn't have any of that crap I just covered in the last several minutes. Nothing but pure blood pro wrestling. The way we like it. So let's talk about it. Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart. WWF Championship. We covered the journey over the last year of Shawn arriving to this point. Vince wanted to do the Boyhood Dream, chase to the title storyline. And he decided that he was going to handpick Shawn as the guy to take the torch from Bret. Notice how I say take the torch as opposed to being passed the torch. Stay tuned for my post-match thoughts. And I don't need to sit here and spend 15 minutes giving you the backstory about the significance of this match in wrestling history. It's pretty much universally agreed that it's a classic, despite some believing it might be a little bit overrated by 2025 standards. I tend to agree with that assertion, although I am by no means trying to insinuate this wasn't a great match. This was a tremendous match. One of my favorite Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart matches to go back and watch. You know, this one just happened to include them both working together. And listen, I'm going to praise most of the match until we get to the end. But I do want to quickly say, everyone that's followed my Retro Raw reviews, you know my stance on Shawn Michaels, or at least you should by this point. I hated the Boyhood Dream story. I thought it was artificially contrived from the very beginning. I think Vince's attempt to shoehorn Michaels down people's throats as a babyface became one of the biggest company backfires he ever experienced when trying to run with somebody as a top guy. I mean, Hogan didn't get booed as bad as Shawn did at the tail end of his run at the top. So, I'm coming at this as somebody that never grew up an HBK fan. Nor did I grow up a Bret Hart fan. But he was at least more tolerable to me than Shawn was. Bret was just boring to me as a kid. Shawn was obnoxious and had go-away heat with me. But with that in mind, I can't objectively sit here and say that I didn't enjoy this match. Because this was, in fact, a very, very well put together 60-minute Broadway. And since you knew they were going to put the belt on Shawn at the end, you know, the ring entrance fit the overall story of the match that much more. Of course, this is the famous one where Shawn rides down from the top of the arena on the zip line. You get that classic shot of him that's been played on highlight reels over and over throughout the years. In hindsight, knowing what was about to happen in a few years. This particular clip did not age well. It's kind of hard to watch it and not immediately think about Owen. Sorry to even bring up the bad memories. It's almost kind of ironic that we literally just sat here and reviewed that 2 out of 3 falls match at the Clash with Flair and Steamboat. Now we get to sit here and review another hour classic. And again, going back to the whole subject on how this match holds up over the years, this is the bone of contention for a lot of older fans. It is still a classic in my book, but it's not necessarily the most thrilling match from start to finish. I mean, let's be honest. The only notable thing in the first 15 minutes was Shawn accidentally super kicking the shit out of Tony Chimmel at ringside. That was the biggest bump I've ever seen Tony Chimmel take. Might have been the only one he took now that I think of it. But the entire first quarter was mostly boring chain wrestling. And if you're someone that's prone to hate wrestling matches where there's a lot of mat holds and uninteresting stuff going on, yeah, you're probably going to have a hard time sitting through the first 15 minutes. What I loved about the structure to this, though, is that they basically dedicated 30 minutes to letting both guys shine equally. The entire first part to the match was Shawn finding ways to throw Bret off his game, always being one step ahead of him and using a lot of that lucha offense that Bret was shit-talking to his advantage. And by lucha, I mean crossbodies and hurricane ranas. Stuff that people barely react to these days because they see it so frequently. But really, that was the entire first half of the match. Was Shawn upsetting Bret and making him angry. And this is truly the thing that makes Bret such an all-time great to me. Even when he's showing signs of frustration or working a more aggressive style, he's not necessarily being a heel. He's just working a very assertive style that he doesn't always have to revert to. But you see him break it out occasionally, and you're like, man, Bret's pissed. But because Shawn kept finding ways to overpower him early on, Bret ended up having to use a lot of questionable tactics to turn things around to his advantage. You had Shawn going after Bret's left shoulder, trying to use that as a target for a story element to the match. Later on, after we reached the halfway point, and Bret had turned things around in his favor, I mean, it basically all started when he gave Shawn that ridiculous back body drop out to the floor, and Shawn landed smack dab on his lower back. And remember, this was still during a time when the outside ring mat was just a thin layer of padding over solid concrete. So all that crap you heard years later about Shawn hurting his back after taking that casket bump against Taker at the Royal Rumble, I say that shit started all the way back here when he was doing stuff like this. Taking flat back bumps on thin floor padding. And Shawn did such a great job selling the back. Part of me was wondering how much of it was a work or a shoot. But Bret stayed on him for a long time. Production did a remarkable job capturing Shawn's facials throughout. And again, Bret was definitely more heelish than Shawn, especially by the end. And they did basically do a traditional comeback series where Shawn started hitting his signature offense on Bret. They were really milking the spot where he was going to go up and tease the flying elbow drop in the last minute. And then Bret caught him in the sharpshooter and had him down in the final 30 seconds right before the bell sounded. I did laugh when they originally put up the scoreboard to show the amount of falls for both guys. I mean, this is the level of production that went into WWF programming back in '96. They had a generic little icon in the lower third that read BH and SM. with the countdown clock right beside it. BH and SM. Even Lawler had to explain, that's Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels for all you peons out there. Thanks, Jerry. Never would have figured that out on my own. Silly as I was, that is by and large the main story coming out of the 60-minute Ironman. The fact that neither guy could score a fall over the other before the time expiration. So when you get to the end and Hebner's about to hand Bret the title back, Bret starts going up the aisleway thinking he legitimately retained the belt on account of a draw. Remember Piper's stipulation, though, that he set up beforehand. There must be a winner. So Gorilla Monsoon goes to Hebner and has Howard Finkel make the announcement that the match is now sudden death rules. First man to score a fall wins. Of course, Bret's reaction is priceless. He just audibly yells out, "Why?" I always love that moment. Of all things for me to love about this match, Bret Hart screaming "Why?" when they try to restart the match. So logically, Bret's pissed. He thinks Monsoon's trying to legitimately screw him. There's your first omen for Montreal in about a year. For all the people that still think that's 100% shoot, here's your first sign that they're working you. For all the people that love long-term booking. And so they restart the match. Bret immediately goes after Shawn and continues working over the back. And they do a deal where Shawn's selling and selling and selling. It looks as though Bret's going to lock in the sharpshooter and get the win. But then Bret turns his attention away momentarily and gives Shawn enough time to recuperate to hit Bret with a sweet chin. That was the first one. And then fast forward a minute later, Bret tries to retaliate and Shawn catches him off guard again. Sweet chin music. Then he falls on top of Bret's dead carcass for the 1, 2, 3. Pretty belligerent with the way he just sort of fell on top of Bret and pinned him. It was not a graceful cover. Just threw his entire body weight on Bret and nearly crushed his face. So, already even by this point, I could kind of sense that something was up. I remember seeing that pin when I was a kid and thinking, God, why did Shawn just fall on top of Bret like that? So reckless. Just made it look unnecessarily stiff. Oh well. Little did I know years later what the afterbirth really signified. And I said I was going to talk about the post-match, not the celebration. So before I start tearing into Shawn here, I will echo one final time. This is a great Ironman match. A fantastic WrestleMania main event. If you're a fan of good old school pro wrestling without all the goofy WWF theatrics, this is your kind of match. I still think it holds up personally, although I do understand the argument from a lot of people that it was probably severely overrated for the time. I honestly wouldn't even say this would be my first recommended Shawn or recommended Bret matches when it comes to novices that are getting into pro wrestling for the first time. Like, if you're going to go out of your way to seek out a Bret Hart or a Shawn Michaels match and try to look for their all-time greats, for me, I still think Bret and Austin was way better. And I still stand. The two best Shawn Michaels matches I've ever seen. It was him and Kurt Angle at WrestleMania, and then it was him and Taker at WrestleMania. The first Taker-Shawn match, not the retirement one. I'm still really bad with dates and numbers offhand. Whichever Manias had Shawn Angle and Shawn Taker won. But this is still definitely a match you need to go out of your way to see. Because there's a lot of stuff to unpack here. Especially if you're somebody that really values pacing and storytelling and accentuating the important things in a match. This is definitely one of the stronger ones you need to go back and see. However, now that I've given everybody their flowers, I'm going to rip into Shawn for being an unprofessional dick. Because he earned it after his performance at the end of this thing. And it's such a damn shame, too, because this was such a great match. Why immediately ruin it afterwards by acting like a spoiled brat? For anyone that doesn't know what I'm referring to, this post-match is very well noted for Shawn telling Hebner to get Bret out of the ring so he can have the ring to himself to celebrate. And like, okay, fine. This is a big moment for Shawn. I get it. You want your moment of shine to hot dog for the camera. I get it. But the condescending way he goes about it, that's the thing that drives me up a wall. And you immediately see it in Bret's face when he goes to look at Shawn. I mean, Shawn won't even make eye contact with him. Like he's fucking royalty telling his peasants to go piss up a rope. As Bret walks to the back, you see him yank the straps down. Someone tries to hand him a towel or some kind of gimmick to sign, and Bret just swipes it away and storms to the back. And again, I remember seeing that as a kid and thinking, okay, well, Bret's just upset that he lost the title, and it turns out it was a lot more than that. He was hot. And there was shit going on behind the camera that they did not show here. Didn't even want to address until years later. And while Shawn's posing in the ring and celebrating with the belt, Bret's in the back somewhere kicking over boxes and throwing shit around left and right. Can only imagine how much damage he was doing to technical equipment. And meanwhile, they're probably feeding Vince information through the headset. Like, hey Vince, we got a problem. Bret's throwing a tantrum back here right now. Something's up. Well, fuck yeah, of course something's up. Bret's justifiably pissed that Shawn tried to stiff him like a job guy. Couldn't even let Bret have a minute or two to breathe after these guys just went 60 plus minutes. No, Shawn immediately had to say, get the fuck out of my ring. Get him the fuck out of my ring. What a piece of shit. And you know, all the discussion we've done about Shawn over the last couple years, you know, me coming on here and giving my honest opinion about what I truly thought of Shawn Michaels around this time, before he found God or whatever. All the people that want to rag on me, and not just me, but HBK haters in general, you ever stop to think about how a lot of that hate comes from having to watch Shawn be an unprofessional asshole to everybody he was working with for the better part of 2 years when he was on top? It's no wonder he had the reputation he did. And this truly was the moment that cemented the real-life heat between Shawn and Bret through the remainder of their time working together in the WWF. This was the catalyst. Shawn disrespecting Bret like that after they just worked one of the greatest matches of their careers. Bret doing the job for Shawn the right way and putting him over, passing the torch and giving him that opportunity to take the ball and run with it. All thrown down the toilet in that one moment because Shawn had to hog the spotlight. So yes, as a matter of fact, I can rationally sit here and equally say, fuck Shawn Michaels, but this is still a phenomenal WrestleMania match. I legitimately hate that I have to sit here and harp on Shawn's attitude in the late 90s. I hate that this is a constant theme that I always have to come back to. But it comes with the territory, man. I can't objectively sit here and just completely ignore all the unprofessionalism that we saw from him around this point. As great a performer as he was, the bad attitude is the continual albatross that hangs around this company's neck. And it's just going to keep building and building and building and building from here on out, all the way until he goes away after WrestleMania 14. So overall, where does that leave WrestleMania 12 in the pantheon of Mania collections? I don't know. I'm a little stumped on this one. It's not a great WrestleMania when you really narrow it down. And the show's mainly carried by the main event. And I guess if you're someone that likes the car crash element of the backlot brawl, you might find some value in that. But other than the six-man that opened the card, there's really not anything aside from the main event that I truly enjoyed. I mean, the backlot stuff just wasn't for me. I never really liked the Goldust Piper feud to begin with, and maybe I'm the only fan in existence that has that opinion. I don't know. I don't really give a fuck what people think. Austin Savio was just kind of there. Hunter and Warrior was a complete waste of time and effort. Especially when it comes to Warrior's 96 run in the WWF period. Waste of time and effort. Nash and Taker was a snooze fest. Is there anything else I'm forgetting? I'm not even going to acknowledge the pre-show stuff with the Huckster and the Nacho Man. The only good to come out of that was that they finally canned all the stupid billionaire Ted stuff. So, yeah, really not a great WrestleMania. Despite what Bret and Shawn were able to do in the main event. But we got a new champion and a new guy at the helm. His name is Shawn Michaels. And if you thought things were bad with Diesel as the WWF champion last year, get ready for Shawn's run. Because not only is it longer, it's about to become a whole lot more infuriating to watch. And that whole tirade's probably a good lead into the following night's Monday Night Raw. Apropos that it's also April Fool's Day. And we are in wherever the hell San Bernardino, California is. My guess is not too far from Anaheim, considering the geography of where WrestleMania was held the previous night. Let's see. If I could spell it right. Hang on, looking it up right now out of curiosity. It is apparently east of LA, almost hugging the border of western Arizona. It says here it's the 18th largest city in California. I assume number one is, what, Los Angeles? Maybe San Jose? I don't really keep tabs on California's population. All I know is it's dramatically downsized in the last 4 years, with people realizing it's an unstable state to live in, especially if you're in one of the big cities. So all the smart people are migrating to places like Texas or Florida to get away from all the wokeness and shitty governing. But that's where the WWF was at the night after WrestleMania. And after much anticipation, all the eerie vignettes of seeing Mankind hanging out in the dungeon or whatever dark basement he was dwelling in. Well, we finally get to see his Raw debut. And naturally, they served up Sparky Plug to him. Couldn't have asked for a better job opponent. Oh boy. Where to even begin with Mankind? One of the three faces of Mick Foley. Four faces if you just count Mick Foley as himself. Well, I'll tell you for sure, the smart fans in attendance saw right through it. He wasn't out there for 2 minutes and you could audibly hear chants in the front row of, "He's hardcore, he's hardcore." Because they all fucking knew. You kidding? Everyone knew who Cactus Jack was. I mean, he worked for WCW, ECW, and Japan by this point. It's not like we were talking about a Mick Foley who had only been in the business for 2 or 3 years. The guy was a fully established megastar before he ever signed with the WWF. I mean, the whole Mankind gimmick was essentially a Vince creation because he wanted to mask the fact that Foley wasn't the most appealing guy to look at on camera, which is in part how Foley got over in the first place. The fact that he was a crazy, out-of-control lunatic with a rugged look that people took to. And yeah, he basically ruined future generations of wrestling by setting the precedent that backyarders were capable of going pro in the same way Foley did. Even though 99.99% of backyard outlaw wrestlers can never lace Foley's fucking boots. But again, the problem was that Foley opened that door to begin with. And it led to a lot of ECW hardcore-inspired garbage going mainstream over the next 20 to 30 years. So believe me when I say, I love me some Mick Foley, but he's not totally blameless when it comes to him inspiring the lowest common denominator of wrestling effluvia, i.e. the Nick Gages of the world. I mean, the reason the Mankind gimmick worked so well in the WWF was that it was perfect timing for what the people were already seeing in the product. I mean, he was so different and so unlike what everybody else was doing. He was dangerous, he was lethal, he was grungy, he was batshit insane, which is absolutely not the real Mick Foley if you sat down to have a conversation with him. Only in character. You know, you watch him in this match as he's ripping out strands of his hair, doing the really high-pitched squeal, talking to himself like a schizophrenic. And that's not me being disrespectful. That was Foley's gimmick. He was supposed to be a very loose cannon type personality. Of course, I didn't stop Bob Holly from having to try to get his shit in here. He's trying to get Foley to sell for him at various points. And I'm like, dude, can you just do your fucking job and get Foley over? Nobody's paying a ticket to see your vanilla bland ass getting offense on Mick Foley. Christ almighty. Foley was too nice, man. I'd have peppered Holly and started yelling at him to cooperate a little bit. It's my time to get over, you dumb shit. Not yours. But Mankind got the win with the mandible claw. And they played some really campy Can Network music to cover up his original theme, which I didn't get at all. The WWF owned the rights to the original Mankind theme. The hell do they need to pipe in generic piano medleys for? But this is a great debut. Despite a lot of people already kind of seeing through the cracks here, the fact that Vince was trying to bury the Cactus Jack gimmick and try to make Foley something that he could own the rights to. In this case, Mankind. I often say that Foley got over in spite of all that. It's not too long from this point where he's going to enter the program with Taker. And by that, I mean the very end of the show. But the rest is kind of history from there. One of my favorite Undertaker rivalries of all time. Him and Foley, man. Natural chemistry at its finest. And speaking of Raw debuts, you want to know someone that didn't get over despite jumping ship from WCW? Mark Marrow, the former Johnny B. Bad. I remember watching Nitro and Raw from around this time. At this stage, my brothers and I were basically watching Nitro live and then taping Raw on VHS to watch later on, because we were much more interested in what WCW was doing from like late 95 up until about early to mid 98. And once they fucked up the whole Hogan-Sting feud, we basically switched gears and started watching Raw live on Mondays because it was clearly the better product by that time. But we were watching Nitro live during this period, and I remember seeing Johnny B. Bad and absolutely hating him. And it had virtually nothing to do with the gimmick. I always loved listening to Little Richard growing up, so I understood what he was going for. I always thought he was just boring as bricks to watch in the ring. Fucking Mick Foley couldn't make his matches worth watching. Remember when WCW was doing the whole Lethal Lottery thing in the build-up to Starrcade one year? They put Marrow and Cactus Jack together as a makeshift team. Whatever year that was. Was it 93, 94? And they still couldn't get me to care about Johnny B. Bad. There was a whole thing years later where they put the television title on him, and I just wanted to strangle myself when he was going over guys like Steven Regal and DDP. And I forget what the whole deal was with him and DDP. I know Mark Marrow was kind of a religious nut. I think he got sideways with Bischoff because they were doing some kind of story at the time where he had Kimberly Page working as his manager or something like that, or he had won her services in a match. I guess it was supposed to involve them getting intimate on camera at some point. And Marrow was basically like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm married. I know Dallas Page is happily married. It's a bridge too far in my book. So you imagine my surprise when he shows up for that cameo at WrestleMania 12. And I'm sitting there as a 9 or 10-year-old going, fuck. Not Mark Marrow. Of course, I didn't actually say fuck at the time, but I was not happy. Yeah, they signed him to a WWF deal. I don't know why. Someone in the office liked him, apparently. Actually, I think the story goes they liked Sable more than they did Mero. But the deal was if Mero was going to sign a contract, then he had to bring his then-wife Sable with him as eye candy. And she all but effectively killed his career in the end, after she powerbombed him on Raw a year or two later. And I don't think Mero ever recovered after that. So yeah, Mark Mero, Johnny B. Bad, whatever you want to call him. I mean, he basically took the same gimmick he was using in WCW and tried to replicate it here. And his matches were still the drizzling shits to watch. Even Isaac Yankem couldn't get anything out of him. You know, again, they were more fixated on putting the camera on Sable at ringside than they were actually focusing on what Mero was doing. So he and Glenn are out there having a match. Mero's doing all his flashy offense that guys in WCW were probably more capable of taking and selling for than a lot of the WWF roster around this time. At one point, they showed Hunter walking through the crowd to sit by Sable and presumably hit on her. Although it was kind of hard to tell because Sable was just kind of sitting there stone-faced and barely reacting to anything. Which is a good summation of her entire WWF career. At least this was before she did all that plastic surgery and aged about 40 years in less than 3. So she was at least semi-reasonably attractive in 96. We'll say cosmetically pleasing. Anyhow, I mean, the match was a complete mess because Mero tried to work a style that Glenn really wasn't suited for. He ended up going over with a diving sunset roll-up from the top. Then after the match, Hunter tried to grab Sable and pull her toward him. But then she slapped him in the face and Mero pulled her over the guardrail. It's been a great 48 hours for Hunter, I gotta say. Losing to the Ultimate Warrior in under 2 minutes and then getting bitch slapped by Sable the following night. Remember all, this guy is now the current acting CCO for the World Wrestling Entertainment. It pays to fuck the boss's daughter. So, remember that World Tag Team title tournament that was seemingly happening off camera in another dimension? The one that solely was happening on WWF Superstars? Well, we have new champions. It's Skip and Trip of the Body Donnas. They're Skip and Zip. Whatever Dr. Tom's fucking goofy name was. It's Chris Candido and Dr. Tom Pritchard, for God's sake. These idiotic gimmick names that Vince had to give everybody to get them less over. So yeah, they wrestled Aldo Montoya and Barry Horowitz this week. I believe it was non-title. Although I don't really know if that would have mattered in the grand scheme of things. The WWF tag belts were about as prestigious as the gum you scrape off the bottom of your shoe when you're walking in the house. The only thing remotely appealing about this segment was Sunny's tits. And after she left the ring, I kind of zoned out. I did like the part in this match where Montoya gave the Body Donnas a double head scissors takeover, and then he sprung to his feet to try to rally the fans behind him. You could hear mice pissing in the rafters, it was so damn quiet. Even the WWF diehards hated this fucking dumbass gimmick. Now, what'd you expect? The guy wrestled with a jockstrap on his face. I don't even think Mick Foley would have been able to get that over if he tried. It's actually quite sad because the wrestling here was actually kind of okay. It was actually really good by the end. But it's the ridiculous nature of all the gimmicks that made it virtually impossible to care. I mean, all four of these guys are just underneath schlubs. I mean, the heels worked over the baby faces for the heat, cheated behind the ref's back on several occasions. Barry made a short comeback before the heels cut him off with Sonny running interference on the apron. Then Candido gave Horowitz a Hurricane Rana, followed with Dr. Tom hitting the bombs away splash for the pin. This was also the moment I realized I think the Body Donnas may have won their very first televised match on Raw, despite them being the current tag team champions and also having been an established tag team for well over a year. Of course, that was before Dr. Tom came along and Louis Spicoli was Candido's original partner. Have I ever mentioned how horrible WWF's tag division was? Truly, when was the WWF tag division good to begin with? 1987? When they actually had formidable tag teams that weren't mid-card jobbers? I don't know. At least Sonny was out there to show her assets, if you know what I mean. And that took us to the in-ring interview with Vince and Shawn. What a segment. It was a wake-up call, I think, for a lot of people that were so gung-ho on Shawn winning the belt from Bret at WrestleMania. The honeymoon phase did not last long. So he comes out and does one of the cheesiest babyface promos you've ever heard. I mean, it was so white meat it hurt the people's feelings. Shawn's out there trying to thank all the people that supported him, all the people that stood by his side and cheered him on. And he's getting what I can only best describe as a tepid applause. I mean, the people were kind of like, okay, yeah, sure. This is kind of corny. And they're obviously trying to push the storyline for the next Day in Your House when Shawn wrestles Diesel. At the same time, they're also promoting a Shawn match for next week with Jerry Lawler, which I presume has to be non-title. So, of course, the people are all chanting Burger King and Lawler. Shawn made a really hokey White Castle joke that fell flatter than a plate full of piss. And this is where I wrote, they've already gone full throttle with making Shawn the generic corporate babyface champion. And just like it did with Diesel, it is blowing up in their face quicker than a hiccup. So Shawn put over Bret and said that he made a believer out of him last night when he lived up to his moniker of being the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. He promises to wear and defend the WWF title with pride and honor. And, well, then he said, come in your house. HBK and the Clique are going to deliver some sweet chin music to Diesel and then do a dance all over his pretty little face. And not a soul in the crowd actually bought the idea that Shawn and Diesel legitimately were mad at one another. This was such a blatant nod and wink at the camera. The only other thing I noted here was Shawn cutting Vince off at certain points and calling him Vin Man, which is so goddamn tacky. I continue to wonder, the more I go back and watch Shawn around this time, how did Vince let Shawn walk all over him like this? I can't even imagine a scenario of Bill Watts being blatantly disrespected like that on camera by any one of his top guys. If Watts was holding the mic for Shawn and he had pulled the mic away telling Watts to keep his mouth shut and let him finish his thought, I mean, Watts would have slapped the shit out of that pansy. And justifiably so. They need to probably find him afterwards. But Vince just laughed and let him get away with it. Just shrugged it off like, no big deal, pal. No hard feelings. Well, you see the result of what happens when you let your top guys walk all over you. Like a fucking doormat. I mean, you know Bret was laughing his ass off watching this. Because he knew what was about to happen. After that stunt Shawn pulled the previous night, telling Bret to get out of his ring right after they'd wrestled an hour plus. Now Shawn's coming out on Raw the next night and talking about how much he respects Bret Hart. Get the fuck out of here. Nobody's buying it. In any case, let's talk about the main event and then get out of here. Spent long enough ranting about Shawn being an unprofessional twat. Main event. Undertaker taking on Justin Hawk Bradshaw. Two Texans duking it out on WWF TV. Even though Taker's not a kayfabe Texan, he's supposed to be a dead guy from parts unknown. I actually remember the feud Taker and Bradshaw had in the mid-2000s when JBL was the champion. Not particularly a great time for the WWE product, but that program I remember being rather enjoyable. I always thought Taker and Bradshaw worked well together, despite being two bigger athletes. I mean, just consider the talent pool in this one match alone. Bradshaw, Taker, Paul Bear, and Dutch Mantel. Now that's star power for you. And for all the people that are going to sit there and piss and moan that I'm putting over Bradshaw, the guy was a good heel and a good worker. Yeah, he wasn't the most pleasant guy to be around, but neither were 50% of the top guys in wrestling at one point. It's a pretty good match. Taker gave Bradshaw a lot of offense here, which I would not have expected. I mean, he sold for a good chunk of the thing until he gave Bradshaw the diving clothesline, the choke slam, and the tombstone. And then right as he went for the pin, that's when Mankind hit the ring for the disqualification and started beating up Taker. In the last few minutes I thought were good. With Mankind going after Taker and throwing him into the ring steps on the floor. He ended up sticking the mandible claw on Taker so they could do the Alka-Seltzer foaming at the mouth shtick. And they stayed on the attack for several minutes. Mankind kept running back out and targeting The Undertaker. Now, they did not waste any time going right into Mankind's first WWF feud. Frankly, I don't think you could have asked for a better opponent. Like I said at the top, I was a huge proponent of the Taker-Mankind feud. Wasn't all too fond of some of the latter stuff they did when Taker was throwing Foley off the top of the cell and nearly killing him. Of course, we're still a couple years removed from that. The 96 feud, though, definitely one of my favorite Taker programs to go back and watch. Especially the Boiler Room Brawl. Albeit not really filmed and produced in the best light. But we'll talk about that in due time. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty much the Mick Foley show this week. The Mark Marrow debut. Nah. Them immediately throwing him into a program with Hunter. Nah. Sable. Nah. I mean, that's just kind of Mark Marrow in a nutshell for me. He was very Meh. I can't even say mid, because mid implies that he was at least average. Mark Merrill was far from average. Slightly below average, if I'm being generous. And of course, yeah, you got the Shawn Michaels interview, which was just... It was what it was. They were going to run full speed ahead with super white meat babyface Shawn. And just like what we saw with Diesel when they put the belt on him and immediately try to make him the corny pro company good guy champion, everything about it sucked dick. And Nash knew that it sucked. But that's exactly how the Shawn Michaels run went. They just tried to force and cram and wedge and thrust him down everybody's throats as a babyface. And it did not work. What would have worked is a solid heel championship run for Vader at the end of the year. But we couldn't have that now, could we? God forbid Shawn would have to do a job to Leon just to win the fucking thing back the following January. The Click, ladies and gents. The definition of letting the inmates run the asylum. Oh, fun times ahead. But on that note, I'm going to wrap up the show here, get some editing going, and try to spend the afternoon preparing for the Friday show with all the other classic content we have in store. By the way, let me know what your thoughts on WrestleMania 12 were. Did you like the show? Did you hate the show? What were your thoughts on the Ironman match? I'd love to hear it. Love to hear it. But folks, we'll catch you on Friday, and until then, have a good week. Take care, and peace out.